Now that I've compared every role in FF14 and WoW, I thought to myself, what else do these MMOs have in common? And that brings us here. Today we'll be covering raiding in both FF14 and WoW. We'll be looking at everything from accessibility, variations of fights, and difficulty. And like I always say, despite their similarities, these are two completely different games. This video is purely for fun and for the sake of discussion, so let's get to it. Starting with WoW, raids are definitely less accessible. I mean, for Mythic, you need 20 people. In fact, I would say that the biggest barrier to entry is finding other players. You need a pretty decent raid size to get anywhere. Not to mention the amount of consumables and enchants required. Raiding can be pretty taxing on your coin purse. Every wipe is a new feast. Every 30 minutes, your flask falls off. Cost of potions, even with cauldrons, can be a lot, especially if you play other games. Not to mention the fact that due to the gear available and the way the vault works, Mythic Plus is a requirement to seriously raid in WoW. Now, despite my issues with Mythic Plus, I think it's fun and it does complement raiding pretty well, but it's also very stressful, and to a player whose game time is limited, it can be frustrating to feel left behind. Now, when all the pieces are in place and you're doing the active raiding, it's mostly a good time. There are 8 bosses in the current tier, and all of them feel pretty unique, even if there are some duds. That's the risk when you have so many bosses. Some are going to hit, some are going to miss. One of the things I love about WoW raiding is the opportunities for every class to use their own unique utility skills. CCs, interrupts, dispels, all these things make classes like priests, shamans, hunters, druids really stand out. Pretty much every class has something that is unique to them, and that's something I definitely value in gameplay. Tier sets are also an amazing reward to have, in my opinion. Something that fundamentally changes the way your character plays is a great reward, and I really love just critting things with my Resto Shaman tier bonus. I don't care what anyone says. Resto Shaman's still great. When you're doing a fight that you particularly enjoy and your team is progressing well, raiding is great and rewarding, and, well, that's what makes raiding so subjective. This is going to seem like a side tangent, but enjoyment while raiding in any MMO is going to depend on the people you play with. These are social games, and if you're playing with people you do not like, then you're not going to enjoy yourself. Vice versa, if you're playing with people you really like, then even the dullest raid tier can seem like a blast. Side note here, one of my favorite raid tiers is Ny'alotha from Battle for Azeroth. Not looked upon fondly, I get it, some of the bosses there suck, but I just had such a good time raiding with a lot of really cool people, and that's why it's probably my favorite raid tier right now. So, side tangent for sure, but something that's important to note, because at the end of the day, the biggest factor in having fun in an MMO is the people you play with. With that side tangent out of the way, the pros for WoW raiding are the unique fights, class utility, and tier sets, among other unique rewards. The cons are in the accessibility. Having to keep up on consumables is pricey, and having to do Mythic Plus can be stressful, especially on tyrannical weeks. Now, before we move on to FF14 rating, once again, going to ask you to like the video, maybe even leave me a funny comment, give your boy some serotonin, and let me know that this is enjoyable content. So thanks for that. Now on to FF14, and FF14 rating, it's interesting. It's way more accessible than WoW rating. First off, consumables are way cheaper, and there are less of them. All buffs, including food, last through death, which is really convenient. Not to mention the raid size is only 8, making it way easier to find other players to play with. I've heard a lot of people talk about how arenas in FF14 are all the same, like big circle meme. And frankly, I disagree. At least in Pandemonium, a lot of the fights make clever use of the arenas, in my opinion. Take P6, for example. The arena is essentially a grid, and the boss will have different mechanics that affect certain squares. It's up to you and your team to find out which squares are going to be safe and where you should go. P7 also does a good job of this, with its 3 platforms and different creatures spawning. Now, where I do find FF14 fights to be a bit samey are in the mechanics. Most FF14 fights are dance fights, which boils down to being in the right place at the right time. It's DDR with extra steps, which is still fun, but it does make progress a bit stale sometimes. Again, at least in my opinion, there isn't a ton to interact with, and I praise WoW rating for its use of utilities and things like CCing mobs, but there isn't any of that in FF14. The best way to describe it is FF14 rating is reactive, whereas WoW is more interactive. In an FF14 raid encounter, the fights are going to play out almost the exact same way every time. Mechanics are on a timer. Sure, the locations where you have to stand change, but in P3S, for example, the ads will always spawn at the same time. Whereas in Heroic Dathia and Vault of the Incarnates, you can choose to leave the ads up if you could take the damage, like my raid group does during a few kills. There's more agency in WoW raiding, which is something I ultimately prefer. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention ultimates. I think ultimates are great. Having this one big grandiose fight with an amazing cosmetic reward is just so awesome. I can really only speak from what I've seen, and furthest I made it is the last phase in Uwu. I definitely prefer the pacing of a fight like Uwu, You fly through the phases pretty quickly, which I really enjoy. But again, the same kind of problem I have. There's not a ton of mechanics to interact with. I would love to speak more about ultimates, but I can't. Now, in terms of base raid rewards, I think they're fine. I think gearing is pretty forgiving compared to WoW, but less exciting. Nothing I get is going to change the way I play. There's no trinkets, no tier sets, but at the same time, I'm guaranteed the gear I want, and I have more agency in picking it. There are also two other types of raids, Alliance raids and Trials. You see in WoW, there's only one raid with a few more bosses and multiple difficulties. However, in FF14, there are multiple types of raids. We've already covered Ultimates, but Trials and Alliance raids are different. Trials are usually covered in the story or in some separate side story. In general, some are mandatory. However, there is a separate optional difficulty known as Extreme. These are usually just for cosmetics. However, at the start of a new tier, there may be a weapon or two that you can use for an upgrade. In general, I think Trials are great and very fun for what they are. Alliance raids, 24 man, so bigger party. Mostly optional, with only one being required, and that's the Crystal Tower and ARR. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of Alliance raids. Please don't get mad at me for this. Just hear me out. Now, to be fair, there's only one I haven't done, and that's the Heavensward one. But I can tell you, in my opinion, I think the rest, excluding, Crystal Tower and so far the new Endwalker one, they're too long. I think there's a certain spectacle to be had, but for my small baby brain, it's too long and not engaging enough. I think the worst offenders are the Stormblood and Shadowbringers ones. I literally fell asleep trying to do the new raids. And again, my opinion, these bosses have a lot of health, just kind of overstays its welcome. Again, I may just have a really, really small attention span. Alright, so pros for FF14 rating, it's very accessible, boss fights feel clever, there's more variety, and in general, it's more convenient. Cons are fights are less interactive and engaging when compared to WoW, and there's less variation when it comes to the fights. So with that, we've reached the end, and in my opinion, pure gameplay wise, I prefer WoW just a bit more. However, again, I love both these games. I get different itches at different times, so it really, it's whatever I'm in the mood for. Again, both great. I like WoW when I want a more serious raid environment, and FF14 is great for, more relaxed, chill raid environment. So with that being said, we're at the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to drop a like, maybe sub. Thanks again, and take care.